I think, oh yeah, you can see behind me what we are going to be thinking a bit about today, next Sunday and the following Sunday, before our 5th Sunday special, when we're back at Templar Square to kind of serve a blessed community in different ways then. So as you may know, don't worry if this is passed you by, but it is the season of Lent. And this is the lead up, this is the 40 days prior to Easter Sunday, when we're going to have a big old celebration, as Josh was just sharing. Cake, special drinks, a lot of fun all together in the dining rooms celebrating Easter, which is a time in the Christian church calendar of great joy, when we remember that Jesus came back to life. It looked so bleak, it looked like it was over, it looked like he was dead and gone and buried, but he was not, because God, the Heavenly Father, had other plans. He brought him back to life. And that's what we will celebrate at the beginning of April. But there is also a very important season, this Lent season, a preparation for that moment of joy. And that's what we're going to think about the next few weeks. I'm just going to read from Mark, because we're going to spend some time in Mark over these next 2 Sundays and this Sunday. So the words should come up on the screen. But I'm going to read. If you have a Bible, you might want to join along, reading in your Bible or on your phone, if your Bible's on your phone. So, this is Mark chapter 15, and we're reading verses 53 to 72. 14. I've written in my notes the wrong chapter, that's not helpful. Fortunately, I have written the talk on the right chapter. Yes, I have. It's all okay. It's all right. I'm not doing Ryan's talk for next week. That would be unfortunate, wouldn't it? Anyway, so Mark chapter 14, verses 53 to 72. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands. Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses, he asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him. They struck him with their fists, and they say, prophesy. And the guards took him and they beat him. While Jesus was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she asked. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said, and he went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near to Peter said to him, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know this man that you're talking about. Immediately, the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. So we've called this series The Passion of Jesus, which comes from a Latin word passio, derived from another word pati, which means to suffer, to endure. It's a word that originated in kind of the Middle Ages in the 12th and 13th centuries in the church to describe deep devotion to God, involving self-sacrifice and often pain, modelled on the example of Jesus' journey to his death on the cross, some of which we're reading this morning. This is Jesus in his passion. Now, probably most of us don't use this word very often in its 12th, 13th century sense. We use the word passion to describe intense feeling, emotion, maybe enthusiasm for something or for somebody, that sense we might get when an emotion seems to take over our mind, when we're driven by feeling, which is connected to this Latin word passio, but as you can see, not quite the same. A little fact, maybe a fun fact. I'm sorry there isn't a huge amount of fun and laughs in this talk. As you can probably tell from just having heard the passage we're reading, it is not full of laughs. It's not an easy read, but just this fun fact, particularly if you're a horticulturist out there, if you like your garden. Passion flower. Has anybody seen a passion flower? Anyone would know what a passion flower looks like? It's pretty, it's a pretty flower. I think it's got white and kind of purple. And the word passion flower is actually derived from this meaning of passion, Jesus' passion. And supposedly, the parts of the flower, those kind of petals of the flower, are meant to symbolise the crown of thorns that Jesus wore. We'll read about that in a few weeks when he goes on the cross. And even some other parts of the flower are meant to symbolise the nails driven into Jesus' hands. And even more so, apparently, the 5 petals symbolise the 10 apostles, excluding Jesus and... Hang on, that doesn't make sense, does it? 5 petals symbolising the 10 apostles, excluding Jesus, Judas and Peter. Maybe there's like 1 petal for 2 disciples or something. Anyway, it's a bit tenuous. But the idea being that the flower is meant to symbolise something of this story. So if you see a passion flower, or maybe you want to buy a passion flower or flower to put in your garden, just to remind you of Jesus, his suffering on our behalf. So we're going to look at this passage in a bit more detail. In particular, we're going to think about the 2 named characters in this story. There's Jesus and there's Peter. They're both experiencing a whole lot of challenge in this passage. Significant challenge. But their responses are interesting and different. So let's start with Jesus. So what do we see Jesus doing? How does he respond to the challenge that he is experiencing? Well, we see Jesus beginning to suffer in this passage. He's suffering from the psychological abuse that's being thrown at him by these high priests, by these leaders of the Jewish people. They are falsely accusing him of doing all kinds of things that he actually hasn't done. They're twisting his words. They're making it out, for example, that he might actually physically knock down the temple. That's not what Jesus meant when he said that sometime before. They are testifying falsely about him. They're lying to try and get him harmed, and they know what they're doing. And their testimony doesn't even add up, but still they carry on because they want him dead. Jesus is experiencing a significant miscarriage of justice, one that I would imagine most of us will never experience such a miscarriage of justice in our lives. They want him dead. He is under an intense form of psychological and emotional abuse at this point. And it gets worse as we read those verses about 64, 65 in our passage. They begin to taunt him. They blindfold him, so he's disoriented, so he can't see what's going on. He can't tell who's about to hit him. And then they taunt him by telling him to prophesy. They're basically saying, look, you who has claimed to be God, right, you tell us what's going to happen next. You tell us who's going to throw the next punch. And this kind of abuse is going to continue right up to his point, up to his death. And what's more, Jesus is not only subjected to psychological abuse from the leaders and the guards here, he has been completely deserted by his friends by this point. One of his friends, Judas, has actively betrayed him. For a few silver coins, has given the game away as to where Jesus is so that his enemies can come and arrest him. A few others of his closest friends couldn't even stay up with him when he was in his hour of need in the Garden of Gethsemane. He asked them to watch with him, to wait in prayer, and they fell asleep. And then they've all fled in fear when he was arrested. He is completely alone at this point. He's been completely let down by those that love him and know him best. No one is there to defend him, to comfort him, to be with him in his hour of greatest need. And it's not just the psychological abuse he's experiencing. He's beginning to experience some physical abuse at the end of our passage, or again those verses 64, 65. He's spat upon and he's beaten. This will only get worse as he moves towards his death. Jesus is no longer a person in the eyes of these priests and leaders and guards. He has become less than a person, an object that they despise. Hence, they're completely able to inflict pain and cruelty on him. So faced with all of this unimaginable stress and pain and horror, how does Jesus respond? Well, it's fascinating. He responds with silence, and he responds by telling the truth. Whilst everybody is lying about him to his face, he doesn't say a word. How bizarre. This is so odd that this clearly surprises the high priest in the story, who maybe isn't even as offended that Jesus won't stand up for himself. He says, are you not going to answer the charges brought against you? And Jesus still remains silent until he answers a very direct question, a yes-no question, about his true identity. The question is put to him, are you the Messiah? Are you the Saviour of God's people? Are you the one who's come, who's going to set us all free, who's going to bring us back to God? And at this point, Jesus must be truthful. And he answers, yes, that is who I am. And at that point, it's clearly too much for those that are watching, for the high priest, who tears his clothes in rage that a human being would be so bold and outrageous and awful to claim that he was equal to God. Jesus' fate is now sealed. He is claimed to be God himself, a crime punishable by death. We see Jesus here completely in control of himself and actually of circumstances, even though it doesn't look that way on the surface. He's actually not a victim of what is going on. He's choosing when and how he will respond rather than reacting to the people around him. He knows his destiny. He knows what's going to happen. He knows who he is. He is not, by this point, I don't imagine, overcome with intense emotion. He's made a choice. He's decided. He is completely intentional and thoughtful about how he responds. He has chosen passion. He has chosen to endure suffering, self-sacrificial suffering on behalf of others, including of us. Now you may think, well, is Jesus some kind of robot? I can't identify with a human being that, faced with all of this, could be so self-controlled, able to keep himself together, not react angrily or out of fear. Well, Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully human. And if we go back a little bit, if you read a few chapters before, we see Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's when his close friends desert him. But he says to his closest friends who are with him, Peter, James and John, he says in the garden, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And then he asks his Father God in heaven, he says, Abba Father, that's a word that means daddy. Like it's a really intimate, affectionate word that he calls his Father. Abba Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Take this pain that I know is about to happen from me. But yet not what I will, but what you will. Jesus is experiencing the full enormity, the emotional, psychological, mental, physical pain, even of what he's just about to commit to doing. He is no robot. He's felt the pain, but he has decided to do it anyway. Not my will, but what you will. So when we meet Jesus in this passage, he's decided what he's about. And he's not going to be swayed from that path. Let's turn to Peter for a few moments in the second part of our passage. Now, when I was reading this, I was immediately wanting to kind of criticize Peter, But then actually I thought, my goodness, Peter's there. I don't think we can call him particularly courageous at this point, but he was actually there. No other disciples, no other friends of Jesus were anywhere near him at this point. They'd fled, they'd run away. He was present, but also he wasn't present. And we don't know whether he was there because he was just curious about what was going to happen. I think it's more likely actually that he wanted to be loyal to Jesus. He loved Jesus, he really did. And he wanted to accompany him in his hour of need, but he just couldn't when it came down to it. I think he was torn. I think he wanted to be there, but he also wanted to be invisible. I think he wanted to be loyal to his Jesus, his rabbi, his teacher, his best friend. But he also was more loyal to himself. He really did not want to get hurt, and he feared that any association that he had with Jesus would lead to him getting hurt. And when I was reading this passage, after I read it a few times, I began to see the parallels, but almost the polar opposite parallels of how Peter responds and how Jesus responds. They're both in a stressful situation. They both may get hurt, but they respond in altogether different ways. So where Jesus is silent, when charges are brought against him, even false testimony is brought against him, Peter feels compelled to open his mouth and justify and defend himself. Where Jesus only tells the truth, Peter tells increasing untruths. He lies. Where Jesus knows that his terrible death is absolutely inevitable, but he also knows the reason for it, and he yet chooses to face it, Peter, fearing his safety is at risk, backs away into an alleyway. This is very human. I think I would have been like Peter if I was even there at all. Peter's survival instincts have properly kicked in at this point. He is reacting impulsively, defensively to save himself. Peter at this point is much more fearful of human beings and their ability to harm him than he is of pleasing his Father in heaven, which we see Jesus doing. Jesus knows who he is. He knows why he was sent. He knows he's the Messiah. He knows he's dearly loved by his Father in heaven, and he's chosen to do this. He is at peace in a strange way, Jesus, whereas Peter is clearly not. I wonder how, not that we can maybe even begin to imagine what it might be like to be in this scenario ourselves, but I wonder how we respond under pressure. Maybe it's not this kind of intense pressure where we're fearing for our lives, maybe it is. But how do we respond under any kind of pressure? Are we quick to defend ourselves when there's a chance that someone might get the wrong end of the stick about us, or they might think badly of us? What about when we face an injustice of some kind, even if it's a small one? Maybe we're blamed for something at work that we didn't do. Maybe it was someone else's mistake and we get the blame. Or maybe we do make a mistake, we let someone down, and we struggle to own up to it. We struggle to say sorry, we struggle to take responsibility. Do we argue? Do we make excuses? Do we exaggerate our abilities? Do we work extra hard to prove that we're actually capable? Do we justify ourselves and place more importance on being approved of by people, or are we more concerned with being approved of by God, by pleasing God, by doing his will? Can we really let God be our judge and our jury rather than human beings? And we see Peter, once he realises what he's done, it's a tragic line. Like, it's a few short words at the end. He broke down and wept. He has his moment of reckoning. He suddenly, when he hears that rooster crow for the second time, he goes, oh no. Oh my goodness. Like, Jesus knew this was going to happen. He told me this was going to happen a couple of days before at the Last Supper. And I said to him then, I will never leave you. I'm sticking with you, Jesus, whatever happens. And I've done exactly what you said was going to happen. And I couldn't do it when it counted most. He dissolves into bitter sorrow and shame. He feels the weight of that on his shoulders. He has let his Jesus down. I wonder whether you've ever had a moment like that, where you're like, oh my goodness, goodness, I thought I wasn't going to do that. Or I thought I could be more courageous in that situation and speak about Jesus, but I've just not. Or I just thought I could stand up for that person who's experiencing an injustice, and I just didn't. I just walked the other, turned the other cheek, or walked the other way, or pretended not to see. I imagine we've all had some moments like that, if we've been following Jesus for some while. But thank God the story doesn't end there for Peter. This is one of my all-time favourite passages in the Bible that you can find in John, just a different gospel, John chapter 21, verses 15 to 19. This is like a stunning move from Jesus. I'm not going to read it to you now. You may want to flick it through it or read it at a later point. John 21, starting at verse 15. This is Jesus, completely abundant in mercy, in compassion, in forgiveness, in his ability to redeem people even when they've messed up badly. And there's a beautiful symmetry here, because just as Peter denied even knowing Jesus 3 times, in John chapter 21, Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to confess his love for him, wiping the slate clean. It's as if he never denied him. Now, this is not Jesus feeling insecure about his friendship with Peter and needing Peter to tell him how much he loves him. That's really not the point. This is Jesus inviting Peter back into friendship with him, back into proximity, back into intimacy with him. And not only that, not only does he restore him to friendship, he then gives him an even greater position of leadership than he's ever had before. Not only does he say, I forgive you, he says, and now go and do amazing things for me. That is just the most stunning form of reconciliation and redemption. Jesus, in that encounter, commissions Peter to be the first leader of his church. This is how Jesus deals with people who've messed up. This is how much he loves us. He doesn't just forgive us. He says, and go and do this for me. Go and be partners with me in extending my kingdom. Go and co-labor with me in the fields. I know exactly who you are. I know what you're capable of. I know how badly you can mess up. But actually I see more than that. And I still want to use you for my wonderful purposes in the world. This is Jesus' grace in that moment in John 21. But that moment of reconciliation isn't only about Jesus, I would argue. It mostly is, absolutely. But Peter also had to do something to allow that grace to flow. Peter had to be willing to come to Jesus. And if we read just slightly before that passage in John 21, you'll see Peter in a boat fishing, doing what he used to do with some of his friends, and he sees Jesus on the shore. He recognises who he is, and he gets out of that boat fully clothed, and he wades to the beach to meet with Jesus. There was something in Peter that knew that even though he'd so badly messed up, that Jesus' love was bigger for him, big enough to cover over all of his faults. Even though at this point in Mark's Gospel, he feels that heavy burden of shame, somehow after that point he knows that there is a way back for him. I wonder when we experience heart-wrenching moments, maybe that's something you've experienced when you feel like you've let God down. You've messed up again. You've done that thing that you said you weren't going to do. You've not stood up for someone. You've denied you know Jesus in some form. You felt that shame, not just the guilt, but that sense that I am bad. That's what shame is. It's like me as a person is bad. I am wrong. Do we enter into despair? And arguably that's what happened to Judas. He badly let Jesus down. And he entered into such depth of despair and shame that was the end for him, and he took his own life. Or like Adam and Eve in the garden, when they've messed up and done the things God told them not to do, they hide from God. They're so ashamed, they hide from God, they don't want to be seen. Or do we do the braver thing like Peter? Do we dare to trust that Jesus, who chose to suffer on our behalf because of his love for us, might choose to forgive us and restore us? And finally, I want to pose one more question, and this is probably the biggest question from this passage, and it's a question that will be repeated as we carry on in Mark's Gospel, as we journey with Jesus to dying on the cross. And it's this question: Are we prepared to accompany Jesus in his suffering during this Lent period, build up to Easter Sunday, and at other times in our life? Now, it's a bit of a strange question, like why would anyone choose to experience pain, their own pain, let alone someone else's pain? You know, it's hardwired into us. It's our survival instinct to avoid pain. We're primed to avoid it. So why would anyone willingly choose to accompany another person in their pain, to feel something of what they're experiencing? Well, 3 thoughts on that, just very briefly as we come to finish. If we allow Jesus' suffering, his passion, to affect us, if we stay with his pain rather than just rush straight to the resurrection, to the nice happy stuff on Easter Sunday, actually we're really going to miss out on something. We're really going to miss out on the real joy that comes. That knowing that Jesus did all of that for me. We're not really going to have such a full understanding of his complete and unconditional love for you, for me, for every human being. That's one thought. Secondly, if we choose to journey with Jesus in his suffering, in his passion, we will have a deeper appreciation of how Jesus suffered and even died. And we might commit to letting some of our stuff die with him. So what do I mean by that? Well, we might decide that actually he's more worth it than us engaging in this thing that he doesn't really want us to do, and that's a waste of our time, or may even be hurtful to us or other people. That sin stuff that the Bible talks about, which is basically where we ignore God's grace, his abundant love for us, and we choose to go our own way. We may actually decide to put some of that stuff to death. We may ask for forgiveness if we really appreciate how much Jesus suffered on our behalf. And thirdly, if we engage with Jesus' suffering, we're likely to become more deeply engaged with other people's suffering. We will develop more compassion. Now, I love that word, compassion. It's 2 words that come together. We've just found out what passion means. It means to endure. It means to suffer. It means to give of ourselves, something that's costly. Compassion means to co-suffer. It's a beautiful word. It means to enter into another person's suffering, to journey with them. If we journey with Jesus, if we have compassion for him, we will be more likely to develop compassion for other people when they are in pain. We will become more empathic people who can imagine what someone else might be going through, and will be far less judgmental of them as well. If we can imagine the pain of others, we will be more motivated to work to alleviate that pain. Whether that is praying for people hundreds of miles away who are suffering that we're never going to meet, because we can imagine something of their pain, or whether that is listening to someone who's going through a hard time, or whether that is doing something very practical to help someone. We will be more likely to choose to turn towards people in their pain rather than to turn away. We will be kinder, more loving people, more people that are more like God himself. And what's more amazing about that is this, that actually when we co-suffer, when we have compassion for people and we work to alleviate other people's suffering, we're actually serving Jesus himself. It becomes an act of worship. These words in Matthew 25, verse 40 from Jesus, he says this. He says, "Whatever you do for the least brothers and sisters of mine," and that I believe means all human beings, "you did for me." Jesus is saying, when you love and care for someone else, particularly those that are suffering, the poor, the marginalised, you are loving and caring for me. Isn't that amazing? Like, just think about that person that you find difficult, but you know they're having a hard time. Or that homeless person on the street that's a bit annoying because they're asking you for money. Or, I don't know, someone that you really don't like. Or just someone that you just rather not engage with because their life looks really too hard and you don't really want to think about it. Or you flick the news on and there's so much pain and suffering at the moment and you just want to turn it off and go back to your nice life. Just imagine that actually in those people's faces is the face of Jesus. Whatever you do for the least brothers and sisters of mine, you do for me. Now, just as this was a choice for Jesus to turn towards suffering on our behalf, this is a choice. We're not going to want to engage with Jesus or anyone else's suffering. but it's a choice that we can choose to make. And my experience is that the more that we make that choice, actually the more we want to make that choice. Like, the more we actually become compassionate people who more likely and more easily reach out to people with love in their time of need. So just one very practical little thing you may want to do. This is purely an invitation. Don't worry, it's not homework. You're not going to be checked up on this next Sunday. But just some thought that might help you is if you want to choose to engage with Jesus in his journey to the cross, if you want to learn what it is to co-suffer with him and with other people, I would just encourage you in your own time, set aside 10 minutes, half an hour, as long as you like, maybe just to meditate on this passage slowly, these words in Mark's Gospel. Or if you'd rather, read one of the other Gospels with a slightly different take on the same narrative. And read slowly. Let those words just turn over in your mind. Start to use your imagination to imagine yourself in that scene. Maybe you want to imagine yourself as Peter. Maybe you want to imagine yourself as a servant girl by the fire, or just an onlooker, or someone standing in the room when the high priests are accusing Jesus. Engage with your imagination and just get yourself into the narrative. Experience some of the feelings that you're noticing bubbling up inside you. What comes to mind? What can you see in your mind's eye? And just notice where you feel resistance as well, where you want to turn away, where you're like, this is just too much, this is too uncomfortable. And just ask God to help you in those moments. Say, Lord, would you help me stick with this? Would you help me stick with you? Would you help me not flee and run away and betray you and deny you? Would you help me to stay the course? And knowing that there is an Easter Sunday. We're not just suffering with Jesus for the sake of suffering, to make ourselves feel bad. There is joy around the corner. Easter Sunday, his resurrection, Jesus' resurrection is coming.